Hey guys, Tim here from Slimes Newcastle. We've got all professional with our board reviews. Now we've got a microphone. Cop that road noise. Alright, today we're going to be looking at the Mark Richards Scalded cat. We've been meaning to do a review of this for a long time. Sorry it's taken so long. Always a bit tricky to get the footage, but this is our favourite small wave board in the world. I say us, I mean myself and Mick. It's all we've been riding in the Little Surf, and it's just an absolute weapon. So what this is, small wave 2+1, because it is pretty loose and slidey, you're typically riding it with the stabilizer in there. I'll talk about fins later. And it does have a fairly wide outline. This is actually based off a kneeboard template that I think Mick dug up from one of MR's back in the 80s. And it's a lot more refined than a classic kneeboard, but you've got that old school beak, lots of thickness distribution through the front and that wider outline. And onto that thickness distribution, I think that was one of the first things I noticed about the board. Probably a little hard to see on the video, but it's got some meat through it up front, and especially because of that beak, it does really hold that thickness there. So I think it was probably only my first or second surf, but I really noticed when you put your front foot down, you're kind of leaning on all that foam. It's fairly shallow on the entry rocket, and it just takes off. Into the back end, it is fairly wide in the tail, so you've got all that kind of loose, fast liveliness of a twin fin. And again, the acceleration I think is the main thing you really get out of this. So compared to the Puffer Twin or the Cali Twin, and definitely the Super Twin, because it's just a faster, looser, skatier machine. And in small waves, who doesn't want to go a million miles an hour and have as much fun as you can? One thing that does set this apart from, I think, every other small wave board, particularly every other small wave twin I've ridden, is the back end of it. Again, a little hard to show in a video, but it's got a beautiful little flip in that tail rocket, and this is a smaller one too, but they all are actually surprisingly refined and thin through that back end of the board. So you have that really nice thin edge, and basically that means a decent section comes your way, could only be 2-3 foot, but you're putting it on rail, you can still push this really hard. Always found with some of the really kind of dedicated small skatey kind of grovelly boards that they're fun, they're fast, they're loose, but they do not want to do a cutback. You can't hammer them, you can't surf them like you'd ride a shortboard, whereas this, it really feels like you can. And then you've got all that up and go speed. So yeah, all that said means the wave range for the cat, anything from pretty much not braking to up to head high is sort of when I have my do my best work, have my most fun on it. Obviously you can ride it in whatever you want, but don't expect to on a 6-foot wave to be able to do a full cutback. But that should cover you really nicely. And again, because of that beautiful kind of thinness and kick through there, even if it's a bowly 3-foot waves, you're actually going to have a really good time. Now just have a quick look at the fins and your options here. Obviously, any kind of performance twin you could use in this. So like that's your more upright style of twin, and normally with a stabilizer. Again, because it's pretty wide through the back end, if you're going to run twin fin only, it's going to be very loose and slidey. We've got a few customers and friends who do it. Typically tends to be those guys who ride a twin only really well. But for me, there's no chance I could do it. So originally I was using the MRs, just his classic twin+1 set in this, and was having a good time, but I was finding it just a little slidey at times and didn't feel like I could push it always as hard as I wanted to. It does hurt MR's feelings a bit, so very sorry, Mark. But I prefer the Mick Fanning twins in this. They are my go-to in a lot of my fins. That being said, there's no right or wrong here. Like Mick likes his with just the classic MRs. Also, bigger guys, or if you find it a bit looser, FCS Power Twin would be the one. And then in the futures, you could look at a T1, would probably be your best bet. And so I'll get you to come back a second, Mick. Now the difference on these fins, again, a little tricky to see in the video, you actually have a fairly similar kind of area and profile and rake on the sides. I think Mick took a bit of inspiration from MR here. Obviously with the funny back edge like a H4, which looks weird but seems to go really well. The big difference when you go to these fins is the stabilizer. And if you're not used to playing around with fins, that might not seem like much, but that's actually a huge difference. Fair bit more bass, a lot more area in it, and that just gives you a little more hold, means you can push the thing harder and really like lean into a rail turn. And that's probably just one thing I didn't touch on as well, is why this board's so magic. It's got the up and go speed. It's probably the fastest board I've ever ridden. You can still push it hard on rail, but it's got this lovely release point out of the tail too. I'm not sure if it's probably a bit of a mixture of the rocker, the concaves, and the flies maybe as well. But it's a kind of board where if you want to be silly and do a little reverse and slidey thing on a fat wave, you can. But if you want to do a proper cutback on a wave that's standing up, you can really hammer it. And it just does the best of everything in the small stuff. So that is why it is the greatest small wave board in the history of the world. Someone proved me wrong. Plenty on the rack here. Come down and check them out. Thanks, guys.